Here we go, part 3 of our MMU3 series. By the end of this one, you will be able to print multi-material. Hello everyone, Chris here. We're taking a look at the Prusa MMU3. It's an add-on unit that you can add to your Prusa 3D printer, where you can take 5 different materials, use that one nozzle, and create multi-material prints. Now, by the end of this video, you should be able to do exactly that. In this series, in part 1, we took a look at all the parts you need to print for your MMU3 and how everything's assembled. In part 2, we finished that up. Then we assembled our filament buffer and swapped out any parts that we needed to on our printer to be compatible with the MMU3. In this one, it's going to be all about filament management, getting everything set up, ready to go to start your first print. As far as calibration goes, I'll give you any tips that I have along the way to make all this as easy as possible. And then we'll move to slicing files and what you need to do to make your prints multi-material. So by the end of this one, you should be able to start using your MMU3 to make all kinds of awesome stuff. So let's jump right into it, and we will tackle the spool holders that we need to assemble to hold all 5 of our material spools. So here are the spool holders for the MMU3. As far as I know, all the kits that are out there now come with these injection molded spool holders. They do work the best out of the 2 types that you see. The other one was a vacuum form tray that had some rods and bearings on it that the spool set on. I think these do work a lot better, but you do have to put them all together. And that's what we're going to do now. There are 5 complete kits because we will have 5 spools of material. So we'll do one together here, but then after that, it's pretty much rinse and repeat. So all of these bottom sections are exactly the same. So you're going to take one, doesn't really matter which one, and set 2 wheels in it. And then whichever part you want to go over the top of that, and they will snap together. And you'll have one for each side of the spool. So we'll build another one. That's what your spool sets on. To join them together, you'll have this flat section. You'll put one on this side and one on the other side. And then you can slide these in and out to adjust for whatever size spool you might want to use. You can do this a couple of different ways because you can hook these center sections together, multiple spools together to keep them all in line. We'll look at that here in a minute when we get the others assembled. But they also give you some pads to put on the bottoms of these to keep it from sliding around. That's what these are here. They're just adhesive backed, but you can put 4 of these on each, just so it gives you a little bit better grip. So we can put 2, 1 on each half down on this side. Let's go ahead and do the other one as well. So there's 4, and then you can flip it around and do 4 more on this end. Once the feet are on, we can flip it over, and then we do have this printed piece. This is just a PTFE guide to help guide the tube and keep it from getting underneath the spool. Depending on how you'd like to utilize your spool holders, this will go on one way or another, but we'll just put it on for this sake here. It just clamps on one side. It's just little clips. You can clip it down, and then your PTFE tube that goes into the buffer will slide through here. So now we have 4 more of these to do. So we'll tackle that. Now we have all 5 assembled. Now there's 2 different ways you can do this. So you can put them kind of in a stadium surround, or you can put them in a straight line. I like the round version myself. But just to give you an idea of what we're doing here, you can link these tabs together, kind of hold them like this and then twist. And then you can keep going, and it'll kind of put all the spools in a semi-circle pattern. I think it saves a little bit of space, but you can flip them around the other way and do the straight line. So if you spin one of these, and you move your PTFE holder to the other side, you can kind of dovetail them together, and that will make them all in a straight line. So you can put your spool wheels back on there, of course, and your holder. But whichever way you'd like to do it, however it fits your scenario. But again, I do like them kind of in the stadium arrangement. So that's what we're going to do for this video. And there's what they look like all together. And before we get too far today, we will need some software. So if you go to the Prusa3D.com, if you go to Help, We're going to need Prusa Slicer, so we'll just go to the original Prusa MMU3 here, because we're going to need some firmware as well. But we want to do drivers and apps, so download that. That's going to get you Prusa Slicer. And then we'll also go ahead and take the firmware, because I'm going to show you how to flash both the printer and the MMU, just in case you don't know or you might need to. But once you have Prusa Slicer, that will enable you to flash your printer from there. It's much easier that way. Once you have Prusa Slicer installed, you want to do the configuration. This should run automatically if it's your first time. If not, you can go back, Configuration Wizard, click Next, and here's all the different machines that you can install. We're doing the Mark III, and we're interested in the MMU3, this profile right here. So make sure the size nozzle you have for that profile, 0.4 is default, is checked. And then you can go through the rest of this if you like, but I'm just going to hit Finish because that's what we actually need. We'll see this more here in a second. But now we're going to move on to firmware. We'll go ahead and power the printer on. That will power up the MMU3. You have to have power on to be able to flash it, but it's going to do some starting moves here just to zero out the drivers and the positions to make sure everything's working. And then we'll cable up USB to the MMU to the computer so that we can flash over the newest firmware. Your USB port is right here. You do get a cable with your MMU3 kit to do this. You should have the badging on the cable up towards the top of the unit. That's how you know you have it in correctly. And then we'll head back to the computer. I've already unzipped our firmware that we just downloaded, but you can head to Configuration, Flash Printer Firmware. It's going to know that it has an MMU connected to it. We'll browse. There should be a Prusa firmware file. We're 3.13.2, that's for the printer. 3.01 is for the MMU3. And we want the MMU3 hex. We'll just hit Open, and we'll hit Flash. It only takes a second for the MMU3 to flash. It'll do a light dance. I have it propped up here so you can see it. But now the MMU3 should have the correct firmware on it. Now we need to flash the Mark III with a MMU3 firmware, so it knows that the MMU3 is there. So we'll unplug the cable from the MMU3. We'll use a USB A-B cable that came with our Mark III to plug it into the computer. Remember, they do have to be powered on. We'll browse for the Mark III hex file. It's in the same zip that we downloaded for the MMU3. We'll rescan. Now it's moved to the Mark III on COM6, and we can hit Flash. This one takes a little bit longer. You're going to get a progress on your LCD. It'll let you know when it's complete. When it's done, it'll reboot. If there's any additional upgrades, it's doing X-Flash right now. It'll get those done as well. When it's done, on the last reboot, we can go into the menu. We'll go into Settings, and we'll do MMU. It should be off. We'll turn it to on. After a couple of seconds, you'll see lights. It's initializing the MMU3. You can see we have an error here. It thinks the filament sensor is triggered when it shouldn't be. That's just because we haven't calibrated yet. So we'll go to that, but now we know at least that we can talk from the printer over to the MMU3. Now we need to calibrate the filament sensor that's inside this chimney. That's what that error is talking about. But you have an adjustment screw here, and then you have the screw that holds it in place up here on top. There's a slot that this screw goes in. But just back this out so it's somewhat loose so we can move that chimney. Don't get carried away, but just back it out a little bit. And then we want to make the chimney move all the way to the left. Let me get in close so I can show you what we're actually doing. So the idea is this chimney can move right and left, and the flag that we added by changing up that idler door, this right here, is what triggers that filament sensor. So when the door moves, when filament is present, it moves that flag, teeters and moves that flag so that it trips that sensor. So we're setting the sensitivity by doing this adjustment. So if you tighten this screw, that's going to move the chimney to the left, push it over this way. But if you back it out, it'll move it the other way. You can see it moving. To start out, to calibrate it, we want to bring it all the way to the left. Don't get carried away. It'll stop right here because it runs out of room on that slot for that top holder screw. But that's where we want to start with it. And then use a 1.5mm wrench to trigger those gears. So it's going to move that door and trigger the sensor. Don't use anything larger than 1.5. You're going to damage something. But stick this in here. It doesn't have to go down very far, just enough to get it through those gears. And you can see where that flag is. It's inside the housing right now because that door has been pushed out. At this point in this adjustment, the sensor should not be triggered. But we can go back down to the screen. But then we can hit the button. We can scroll all the way down to support and go into sensors. Sensor info. You can see the PINDA is not triggered, 0 is not, 1 is. So PINDA, FINDA, and filament sensor are all not triggered. PINDA is for the bed probe, FINDA is the filament sensor on the MMU3, and this is the filament sensor on the tool head, the one we're adjusting right now. And this is kind of challenging to show both at the same time, but I'm going to back out a bit. But just note what we're looking for is that fill sensor status. We're at 0. So I'm going to take the wrench out. We're still at 0. So the idea is to just get it adjusted enough so that putting the wrench back in triggers this to 1, and it does it consistently. So I'm just going to back out the chimney about 1 full turn, and then test it again with the wrench. Just pushing down on the gears to get that door to open, we're still not able to turn it to 1. So I'm going to take the wrench out, I'm going to back it out another full turn. We'll test it again with the wrench, still not 1. And we're going to repeat the process until we get close to that sweet spot. 3 full turns, and you can see if we put the wrench in, we go to 1. If we take it out, 0. And you want to test this multiple times. This is the key to making sure this works correctly, is that you consistently go from 1 to 0. You can see it flip-flop there. So we probably want to back it out another half turn at least. So we'll do that. Test it again with the wrench. We'll back it out just a bit more. Make sure the screw on top that holds it together is tight enough to allow it to not be sloppy, but loose enough to allow it to move. But we'll test again. Wrench in. Test it a couple of times to make sure there's no false triggers of the sensor. It's going to be really consistent. And when you're happy with the sensor is triggering consistently, when the filament is present or not present, or the wrench, then you can go ahead and tighten up this adjustment screw. That should keep it in place, whatever adjustment you made. But after you tighten it up, make sure you test it again. We don't want any inconsistencies here. And we should be good. Now, we did see some errors when we first flashed the firmware and it came up. It was actually complaining about the FINDA probe, which is this one right here. So it could complain about this one or the one that's on the tool head. This one was just a little bit too close to that ball, but we need to calibrate it as well. So if you see that error, to clear it, just loosen the holder and pull the sensor out just a little bit to clear the error. Then you can move on with the calibration steps. If you need to move your selector with it on, you can always use the buttons. Left goes left, right goes right. With the FINDA, you actually have a sight window. We looked at this when we put it together. But the bottom of the sensor should be pretty much flush with this window. And then it has threads on it so you can spin it right or left to make it more or less sensitive. But you can test it the same way. So in the menu, we've got the same scenario here for FINDA 0 and 1. So we can use our wrench to trigger it, to represent the filament, and just make sure it's super consistent. So it triggers successfully every time. If you move it around, it's not sloppy in there. It doesn't accidentally trigger. That it has a good height. Pull it out. It's just as important that there's no sloppiness, that it goes back to 0. It has to know what the condition of that filament is in for it to work correctly. So try to adjust it a bit. Again, you can screw the FINDA probe down and up because it has threads to make it more or less sensitive. More sensitive, you would screw it down, less, back it out, because there's a steel ball in there that's actually triggering the sensor. You saw that during the assembly. I've said that like 10 times. But it is true. So adjust that when you're happy that it's really consistent. Then you can just tighten up that screw again for your fender to keep it from moving. After you tighten it, always test it one more time. And then the fender should be good. It's kind of hard to see, but there is an LED light on top of the super fender. You can use that to judge whether it's triggering correctly. I use that a lot during the print. You watch it print, watch it change filament, make sure that it's not blinking at all. That's a great indication that you don't have it adjusted correctly, but that's just kind of an eye catcher to tell if there's something going on during the print. So after you have everything calibrated, you can get out your Bowden couplers, and we can attach those. So you'll have one down here. I usually just get them finger tight. There's no need to tighten them up really tight, just as long as they don't back out. You could probably get a wrench on it to give it just a little tweak, but again, doesn't have to be very tight. And then there's a Festo up here on the selector. I like to leave this one actually a little looser because this is the first thing I do if there's an issue. I'll pull this one off just to inspect things. But we're not going to have any issues, so we'll tweak it just a little bit with that wrench. And then the PTFE tube that actually feeds that hot end is a specific piece. This inner diameter is 2.5. It's bigger because you have to pull that filament back after it's had the tip shape on it. The tip is going to be bigger, but we want it to successfully get back to the MMU3 without having any issues. We don't want it to get stuck. So the tube that connects these two is a specific size, so if you ever have to change this out, remember that. But it'll just poke down into both sides, and now they're connected. And if there's one tip that I can give you about this whole thing, the MMU3 is very smart. The firmware on it can get you out of a lot of situations all on its own without you having to intervene. But it has to have good feedback from those sensors. If you're having issues, it's likely that one of those sensors hasn't been calibrated correctly. I ran you through the process fairly quickly, but you have to make sure that those are calibrated and there's no sloppiness in it. They have to be dead on, and sometimes you could even get a piece of filament in the way that are causing issues with that sensor. But the redesign of these parts keeps that down to a minimum. So if you're having issues, that's the first place you need to go. Make sure those sensors are doing their job well. Now we're going to move on to filament. So we have our spool holders back here to keep everything organized, to do it the way that the MMU does it and the buffer does it. We're going to call this 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The printer will set here. The buffer, we're just going to lift the printer up. This goes in the center of that 30-30 extrusion. Just hooks it so it stays in one spot. And then we have all the tubes that come out of the buffer. They are labeled 1 through 5 as well. But in this order, what I just showed you, this one is the first one. So the furthest one out. We'll just press it in to the spool holder. I like to leave about 5 millimeters on the other side. We don't want the tube interfering with the spool as it moves. But then tube 2, tube 3, tube 4, and tube 5. Now you can kind of adjust things now that they're plugged in. You want to keep things as organized as possible to make it not confusing. And I can't remind you about this enough, the spool filament that we just plugged in has to be fed into the top of the cassette. The bottom is where the MMU plugs in. And I know this is a terrible angle because of that light, but you can see on the back of the MMU, we've got 1 through 5. So you want to make sure you put the right tube in the right channel of the cassette. So this one all the way over here, that's number 1. This is cassette number 1. So that one coming from the MMU will go down. I like to put them in between, but it goes straight down into that cassette until it stops. Then we'll grab the one for 2. Do the same thing. Remember, the more organized you are, the better off you're going to be. Then the one for 3, 4, and then 5. And I told you before I like to print out extras of these, so I'll put one up here at the MMU as well. So I like to put it right in here, again, just to keep everything nice and tidy. Prusa was also nice enough to send over Filament to use on our MMU3 series. Now, I do highly recommend when you start out to use Prusa Filament. After all, it is designed to be used on these machines, but it's also highly accurate. And if you were to have to call for support, it's easier for them to troubleshoot if they know what kind of filament that they're dealing with. But consistency is key here with any multi-material setup. The accuracy in the filament is only going to help you out. Also, I suggest you start with PLA. PLA is the easiest to use, and it's the most consistent. So it's easy to troubleshoot going forward. If the tips aren't quite right, there's something going on, PLA is going to be the best place to start. Then you can branch out from there, whether it be different types of filament or different brands. But this is going to keep your troubleshooting down to a minimum if you stick consistently with the same filament, at least at the beginning. So for today, we have 5 different PLAs here. We're going to be using some Galaxy Green, and we also have some recycled filament. These are all PLA. They're made with recycled PLA, but they all have natural pigments. And I found it kind of makes them earthy colors. Like this one is wine pigment. This one is algae. We have some Prusa Galaxy Black, which is one of my favorite colors, black with sparkles. And then we have corn pigment down here. So it should make some pretty unique prints. So everything's unpacked, and honestly, from my wine and my algae filament here, they're probably a little bit too close for this video, so we'll sub out another color. We'll go with some risotto PLA just to give us some contrast. This is the recycled as well, but it's kind of a nice white cream color. And the first thing you want to do on any of your filament, brand new spool, no matter what, when you're starting to print with your MMU3 or any MMU, you want to put a nice sharp tip on the end of that filament so it loads successfully. It's going to make your life so much easier, but try to put a 45-degree angle on that tip with your cutters. And we'll do that to all 5 spools. Remember, never lose the end of the spool because it will get tangled almost instantly, and that's not going to be good for your multi-material experience. Now we're going to go through how to load the filament into the buffer. I've spun it around here just so I can show you easier. But we'll take our first one. How about corn pigment? We'll want the filament to be pulled in from underneath, like so. Remember, you have to keep hold of that filament so that you don't get a tangle. But I like to just unspool a bit, keep track of it, and then we'll start feeding it in from the spool holder side. Once you have some in there, the spool holder, this PTFE tube, will kind of keep track of it for you. But then we're going to get to the filament buffer. Once it's at the cassette, you can pull the cassette out. Keep track, make sure the filament is loading into the top one. You can easily get these flipped over. It needs to load into the top one and then into the MMU3 from the bottom one. So it guides into that cassette, just pull it around. Now that you have that pushed through, you can go ahead and set your filament into the holder. Make sure you're spaced correctly for the size spool you're using, and it turns freely. We can pull it through, go around the cassette, and then drop it right in the other side, and it's going to feed right up to the MMU3. At this point, with the cassette out, the easiest thing to do is to start the preload sequence on the MMU3. So from the menu, we're going to go to preload to MMU, and we're just going to do load all. Since we're doing all 5, this is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in order. It's going to go to the first filament and then just start spinning, trying to pull in that filament. And it will do this continuously until the fenda has been triggered. You can see lane 1 light up there is flashing, waiting for that filament. So we'll go back to the cassette. Again, Remember, the bottom one is the one that feeds the MMU3. So we're just going to push that in and push it up to the MMU3 until it grabs it. It grabbed it. You can see it's pulling it in. You'll see it back it out to test it a few times, and then it'll move to the next filament. So now it's trying to load number 2. And we'll do that for all 5. Once it's done, you can go ahead and just load this back into the buffer. With the spool side on the top, MMU3 on the bottom, we'll just slide this whole thing in. We'll lock that in place, and then we'll start on the second one. We're going to load Galaxy Green. I've pushed the filament all the way up to the buffer. Now I'm ready to put it on the spool holder. Make sure it's turning successfully. Pull out the cassette. Pull the filament through. Load it into the tube going up to the MMU3 until it grabs. It'll start moving it on its own. And then it moves on to the third one. Making sure to load it where the tube feeding the MMU3 is on the bottom. Galaxy Black on 3. We're loaded. MMU3 has grabbed it. We're good to go back in. Number 4, Wine Pigment. MMU3 is loading it. Does a quick test. On to number 5, our Risotto. Everything has been loaded successfully. Another quick check just to make sure that the correct paths are going to the MMU3. Ones are going to the spool holder. Then we can flip around. Make sure all your filament spools and your PTFE tubes have the clearest path possible to the buffer and to the MMU3. And I highly recommend, at this point, after everything's loaded, just go ahead and tell the MMU3 to preload everything one more time. So just select preload to MMU. It's just going to run through 1 through 5 and test it all to make sure it's ready to load them when it needs them. It's just a great check if you've messed with anything filament and it only takes a second to do. So it runs through 1 through 5 just like we saw before, taps the fenda with the tip of the filament a couple of times just to confirm it's there waiting to be loaded. Now that I'm satisfied, I'm going to lay our MMU3 unit down in the position that it needs to be to work. We'll go ahead and put our sheet down and we can clean it to make sure we get good adhesion. I like to use smooth PEI for PLA filament. If you think you need to, go ahead and do a first layer calibration again. We shouldn't have a problem with that. You can always adjust it on the fly if it's a little bit off, but we didn't change anything concerning the nozzle, so we shouldn't have to rerun it. But now you're ready for a multi-material test. It's been a long time coming, but we're finally ready for our first multi-material print. And we want to start off a little bit slow here because we want to confirm the MMU3 is doing its job. Basically, we want to confirm that all the filaments are being used correctly. It's putting the tip on the filament. It's able to use all 5. There's no issues there. As well as confirm the printer is doing its job. It should act the same as it does on a single material print as it does on multi-material. It really doesn't know the difference. So good bed adhesion, all the layers are sticking together, all that good stuff. So let's get into the slicer and set up a quick test. So back to Prusa Slicer, you saw already we went through the configuration wizard to add our MMU3. So we're just going to select it from the pull down. We've got Mark 3S, Mark 3S Plus, MMU2, and then we have MMU3. The single is for 1 filament. You can select just one. We can go over that later. We want to use all 5 right now. So this is the one you want. When you bring that up, it's going to have all 5 of your materials here. The print settings will just stick with speed at a 0.2 layer height for now. You can adjust that if you wish. But we're just testing. I do recommend that you update all of your colors. Just click on the color box and find something that's close to the one that you're using. So let's go with the lighter orange. This is that corn recycled PLA. It's kind of an orangey color. And then we have Galaxy Green. We have Galaxy Black in 3. We've got that wine color in 4. So we'll go kind of a brown. And then we have our Risotto. So So we'll just go with white. But now we know where these are going to be placed on the bed, where we expect the color to be laid down. It's just easier to sort this out visually. And I would just put in some test objects for now. So right click out here on the bed and hit add shape. And let's just do some boxes. And we'll multiply that. So we'll just make sure there's 5 of them. So you see there's 5 instances over here. We can let it arrange it. I usually like to just move my white tower over to the corner. Keep it out of the way of my objects. You can see since we multiplied it, they're all one instance. They all have the same properties. So if you click over here on the shape box, hit set as separated objects. So now they're all unique. Now you can click on the extruder and select which one you'd like to be on which material. So we'll just go down the line. Box 1 here, we'll set it to 1. It always defaults to 1. We'll set this one to 2. And then so on. 3, 4, 5. So there's our 5 different material blocks, and that's basically all you have to do. Now, if you don't want to do this many color changes for testing, you don't have to. You can just change the shape of the block. But if we slice now, that's going to give you an estimate of how long this would take and how much filament. Switching all of these colors, we're doing 500 tool changes, takes almost 13 hours. So you probably don't want to run a test that long. So let's make the boxes just a little bit shorter. So we'll go back to editor view. We'll just select one of these boxes here. I'm going to unlock scale factors, and let's just make them 5 millimeters high instead of 25. And you can do that for all the boxes. Just makes the test a little shorter, but still gives us plenty of filament changes to confirm MMU3 is doing its work successfully. So we'll slice again. This takes a little less than 3 hours, 100 tool changes. Still plenty of tool changes to let us know that everything's okay. So we'll export this over to our SD card. And if you've already done your preload sequence like we did before, we're ready to go. So we can just load our SD card, select that shape box print we just set up, and we'll start our print. It's going to go ahead and preheat just like any other print. And once you've completed your starting sequence, just like the Mark III does every time, it's doing the leveling. It's going to park and then call the MMU3 to bring the first filament in. We're parked. MMU3 has selected the first filament. It's bringing it in. It's waiting for it to trigger the filament sensor down here so it knows it's at the hot end. The hot end will bring it in and start to print. We're doing a prime line here on the front. We're doing a quick skirt. That's the default setting for the Mark III. I like to test on the skirt to make sure it's sticking correctly. That's a good first layer height. And then it's going to start the base for the first object. When it's done with that, it's going to go build the base for the wipe tower. So it starts laying down portions of that wipe tower, and the wipe tower is a necessary evil when you're doing multi-materials with one nozzle, because it has to have a place to swap out the colors. So to pull out the old filament and bring in the new so the colors are clear, as well as this is where it does its ramming and cooling the filament to create that tip so that it can be loaded and unloaded. So now it's unloading that filament. The MMU3 goes to the next filament, brings it in. When this filament sensor is happy, it'll bring it down to the nozzle. Now it's going to purge all that leftover filament from the first material, make sure this color is consistent, and then move on to the second object. Something else you'll notice, we backed out that filament from the first object. It's now here in the buffer. This is what the buffer is used for. When it's done using that filament, it can't put it back on the spool, so it puts it in the buffer so that it's ready to go for the next time. This keeps the filament organized and from pulling on each other so that it will load every time that it's called. So it's done creating the wipe tower. It's now creating the second object. It creates a platform in that wipe tower so it can support all the other filaments that it needs to wipe and do the ramming. It just has to have a good footprint, but it doesn't utilize as much filament going forward. There are ways to reduce it, but we can get into all of that later. Right now, we're just making sure the MMU3 is doing its job consistently. So far, so good. We're on the second material. We're just going to go ahead and let this run. Let's take it to a time lapse. We just want to get a few tool changes in. This one does 100. You saw that before. Just to make sure the MMU3 is operating as it should be. And our print stopped, but that's a good thing because I can show you how to recover from it. We probably just don't have one of those sensors configured exactly like it needs to be. So we're going to fix it. So this time we got Fenda filament stuck. You'll notice it's showing you which sensors have been triggered. You have the Fenda, which has been triggered, and filament sensor, which it hasn't. You can also get more information about this error if you just scroll and hit the down arrow. It's saying that the Fenda didn't switch off while unloading. Ensure filament can move and Fenda works. In this case, you can see that the filament is all the way down to the coupler still. So my guess is it tried to pull the filament out, the MMU3 tried to pull it back, and it could not. So the first thing we need to know is, what does that filament tip look like? So I'm just going to release the coupler here and pull out the PTFE. There's the filament tip, and it looks like it's in pretty good shape. So I'm not worried about that. Also, it was pretty easy to pull out, so it's not stuck in the filament gears, in the gears down here. That is somewhat common. If the tip is odd shaped, that could happen. But we're okay there as well. Up here at the selector, the screen did show us that the Fenda was triggered, but what I like to do is pull the coupler from this side, and by taking a look at the LED here, remember we discussed there is a light on the top of these sensors, I'll move the filament a bit just to make sure that it's not triggering that Fenda probe. The light isn't coming on, meaning that it's not getting a solid trigger on that filament. And if we pull the filament out a bit, you can see the gears on the MMU3 have tried to pull that back and it couldn't, and it's ate a hole in it. So to get us back in a working state, we're going to go ahead and clip the filament past the chewed spot, and we'll just pull the filament out of the Bowden tube, and we'll put that back on. But more than likely what happened is that when the filament sensor down here, when it goes off, so when we go back to 0, that means the filament isn't present. When that happens, the MMU3 knows to take over. If that happens too soon and the filament's still in the gears, then the MMU3 decides to start pulling on it, and it chews a hole in the filament like you saw without actually moving the filament. So the filament was still in the gears, even though we could pull it out by hand. But that just usually means that this is set where it's too sensitive. So it's going off before it should. So to decrease the sensitivity of the filament sensor, we need the chimney to move to the left. So you would tighten up the adjustment screw. So the screw that holds it on, we're just going to back it out a turn so this part can move. And we're going to do a half turn on the adjustment screw, so make it a half turn tighter. That will reduce the sensitivity. We can lock our chimney back down. We'll check the screen one more time. Fenda is still triggered because we left that filament in there. Filament sensor is not. Let's go ahead and let it retry it. So MMU3 reset the filament. Now it's going to try that load again. We're loading 3. We were able to load. Now we're going back to the wipe tower. So hopefully that adjustment is going to make it more consistent. We'll keep watching it, and we'll make any corrections that are needed. So there we go, our MMU3 test print is now complete. We did have one hiccup where we had to adjust the filament sensor, and you might have to do that a couple of times, but you're going to get a feel for it, and once you have it all dialed in perfectly, it won't change. It'll be super consistent. Same way with the fender probe. You might have to adjust it a couple times here and there, and you will have to do some maintenance like cleaning out any filament that might get left behind, any strings, depending on the brand you use. But this is so much more consistent than the previous version. The MMU3 has a lot of smarts built in to get you out of pretty much any situation, no matter what type of filament or what brand you want to use. So this is the end of part 3. We are officially up and running on the MMU3 on our Mark III printer, and we're doing multi-material prints. So that will be the end of this series, but there is a lot more that I can show you. You will definitely see the MMU3 back because there's lots of different tips just on how you slice things and how you can control the MMU3 with this new firmware to change things up and make things very interesting. So that will be it for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and this series. I will see you really soon on the next one.